Mr. McCormick, would there be anyone at the table that would like to add to your remarks? Would they have authority to add to your remarks?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Perhaps Dr. Aleck may wish to add something.
Thank you, Chair. I was very closely involved in the development of the MOU and the situation that preceded it. And if I can just say something that might put some context both to Senator Fawcett's question and to Mr. McCormick's answer, it might help a bit. Firstly, the rationale for the new MOU was to create an environment in which, if I may put it this way, as much information as appropriate could be exchanged between the agencies. The motivating factor at the time had far less to do with any concerns on the part of the ATSB with information CASA was not providing to them, but rather information that the ATSB in the past had not provided to CASA. The fact that the provisions read the way they do reflect a very appropriate form of reciprocity, in which the ATSB, under its new leadership, said, yes, we will provide you with more information, and we expect you to provide us with the same. In the spirit of that arrangement, and I agree, it probably should be read largely. The question should be, the default position should be, well, we'll give you as much as we possibly can, and then you decide when we've given you too much. By the same token, there comes a point where the question has to be asked, is this relevant? Now, I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but I think the provision talks about reports. And to be sure, there was a report there because it took the form of a report, and that's what Mr. McCormick asked for. It's quite conceivable that that information could have been developed within CASA in a form that didn't take the form of a report, and that would become playing smart. Well, we'll put it in this form so it doesn't go there. This MOU is now up for review, and one of the things we've both agreed between the agencies, unrelated to these particular issues, is that we have to refine these points. And we have to say, how much information have we given you that you didn't really need? How much information has not been passed that really ought to have been? And I dare say these provisions will be refined with that in mind, not so that to suggest that people have been manipulating the provisions, but taking a view about how much should go, how much shouldn't. In many situations, it's important that information, certainly that passes from the ATSB to CASA, come under a Section 32 provision to provide the kind of protections that are available to people when the ATSB releases information. So in that respect, it's a learning. I should mention, too, and I don't mean to diminish the importance of anything, but the FRMS issues, to the extent that they bore on the accident, which is what the ATSB was investigating, is somewhat debatable. I'm not going to say whether it's irrelevant or relevant, but the fact of the matter is that, and it's a matter for Mr. Dolan, that it's quite conceivable that information which, on a liberal reading of that provision, ought to have been passed to the ATSB at a particular time and wasn't, perhaps did involve a less than fully faithful adherence to the provisions. But then the question is, was that a harmless error? Now, in light of the evidence that was produced at the proceedings, one would say that, well, FRMS was such a major issue. How could this information not have been passed in the spirit of that provision? But I don't think there's a conclusion on that. And I think that that's the context in which this needs to be looked at. I think Mr. McCormick made it clear that it is perhaps something that needs to be looked at as to whether or not information of that kind should be passed. I'm not suggesting it's the case, but as we've heard certainly from people in industry, if the concern is that introspective examinations of one's own organization then become a matter of public consideration, might that not then discourage the conduct of those activities? Now, I think a slightly different standard applies to government agencies looking at themselves as opposed to private entities, but the principle's the same. And I think that's a consideration that will need to be taken into account. Historically, the ATSB, and I think everyone at the table will agree, spared no opportunity to have a go at CASA for some failing, legitimate in many cases, whether it bore directly on the situation or not is questionable. And it's conceivable that some of those concerns vestigially remain. Geez, if we tell them this, the whole focus is going to be on what we failed to do at a particular time. The only other point I'll make, and that is that the information that came to us in relation to the operations of Pel-Air were based on the routine auditing processes that CASA had had in place for many years. Not deficient. Could they be better? Absolutely. And I think that's the point Mr. McCormick's been made. The Chamber's report, coupled with the special audit report, was an extraordinarily incisive review, both of the operator, far more detailed and far more depth than a standard audit would ever be, and both of the operator and us. So with those considerations in mind, could things have been done better? I don't think Mr. McCormick has ever said that.
Go back to Senator Fawcett. Before I do, it is the concern of this committee, obviously, that we don't want to breach areas that would be considered in future inquiries. Well, we won't tell them because they'll use it against us. But it troubles us greatly that we get this right, because we don't want to be be seen to be not investigative enough if there happens to be another accident that we may have been able to prevent. So back to you, Senator Fawcett.
Thank you. This is a comment as opposed to a question. Dr. Aleck, you made the point about internal reports not being made public. I just wish to make the comment that if CASA had